Episode 4, Family Reunion. Hearing an approaching vehicle, my mother walked out of the kitchen hut and stood at the door. She rubbed her eyes several times in a bid to establish who was behind the wheel of the sleek vehicle that had stopped in front of the hut. I climbed out of the car, and upon recognizing me, tears of joy welled up in her eyes. My heart raced wildly with joy as I walked towards my mother with my arms outstretched. We clung to each other tightly and neither of us could utter a word. My father arrived at this surreal moment, and when it dawned on him that the young man who was locked in an embrace with his wife was his prodigal son, he felt lightheaded, his knees gave in, and he passed out. Fortunately, there were no sharp objects where he fell. My mother and I frantically ran to his side and attempted to revive him. He came to after a few minutes and looked up to see my mother and I looking at him with relief. I helped my father to stand on his feet and we hugged. He told me that it had been his and my mother's biggest fear that they would die without ever seeing me again. The three of us then went into the hut and my mother broke into a happy dance and ululated. My father beat a drum and I joined my mother dancing. Following this, my parents knelt and faced the bench on which my mother stored her clay pots, and they gave thanks to their ancestral spirits for having led their prodigal son back home after a 10-year absence. They venerated their ancestors because they believed that despite the death of their forefathers, many decades in the past, they continued living in the afterlife as ancestral spirits and guided the life journeys of their living descendants. They regarded Christianity as a foreign religion that sought to condemn, demonize, and replace African traditional religion. They often said the mantra that was repeated across Africa that early Christian missionaries who brought the Bible to Africa had used Christianity to forcibly take land away from Africans. Growing up, my parents had raised me to believe in African traditional religion, but I had converted to Christianity 3 years before. I wondered how my parents would view this decision I'd made. Would they view it as an abandonment of the religious beliefs, practices, and values of my indigenous people in favor of Western culture? As I ate the delicious welcome home meal that my mother had cooked, I informed my parents that I'd converted to Christianity and my father asked me what had led me to change my religion. I explained to my parents that I'd made this decision after a near-death experience after a car accident. Following the accident, I lay on a hospital bed for several weeks, slipping in and out of unconsciousness, and I was sure that my life was about to end. In one of my bouts of unconsciousness, I had a vision where I stood in front of a man whom I immediately recognized as the Lord Jesus Christ. He told me that it was not yet my time to die and would send me back to earth where I was to serve him for the rest of my life. I regained consciousness after having this vision, and in 2 days, I recovered completely, and my doctor was amazed by my miraculous recovery. When I left the hospital, I attended church, and when the preacher asked for those who wanted to invite the Lord Jesus Christ into their life, I was the first to stand. My mother responded that she had no objection to my decision to turn to Christianity because it was entirely up to me what I chose to believe. My father added that while he understood my decision to change my religion, he would not be happy if I tried to coerce him and my mother to abandon their religion. I gave my father my word that I would not coerce them to convert to Christianity, but told him that I believed that if Jesus Christ himself knocked on the door of their hearts, they would not be able to resist his calling. I was surprised to find a sleek vehicle that was parked at my grandparents' homestead when I arrived home from school, and I thought that my grandparents' dilapidated huts made the sleek vehicle look out of place. I heard my grandparents' happy and excited voices, coming from inside the hut, but the third voice, which I assumed belonged to the owner of the sleek vehicle, was unknown to me. I curiously walked into the kitchen hut and bid my grandparents a good afternoon. Then I politely greeted the male visitor with a curtsy and a handshake. He looked at me pensively and tears glistened in his eyes. His reaction was enough to make me realize that I reminded him of someone dear to him, and my notion was confirmed when he told me that he was my late mother's twin brother. His revelation sounded like music to my ears. I was ecstatic to finally meet Uncle Yananai, whom I had heard much about for the past 12 years and had longed to meet. He whirled me around several times with joy, and Grandmother Mapako danced and ululated, while grandfather Mapako looked on with a happy smile. Uncle Yananai told me that following my birth, my late mother had given him the honor of naming me, and he'd chosen the name Chiwanizo because I was a mirror image of his twin sister. Several villagers, who included extended family members, friends, and neighbors, got wind of Uncle Yananai's arrival, rendering his desire to spend his first day back home with his immediate family no longer possible. It was obvious that his sleek vehicle had been the giveaway. Uncle Yananai felt embarrassed by the attention that his arrival had aroused, but the curious villagers who showed up to welcome him gave him so much love that he soon felt at ease. He told the gathering that he was happy to be back home and that Mupatedzi village held the best memories of his life. In turn, the gathering filled him in on the marriages, births, and deaths that had occurred in Mupatedzi village during his 10-year absence. Uncle Yananai's homecoming was therapeutic for my grandparents. My grandfather now walked with his head held high, and he developed a spring in his step. My grandmother now had an agility that belied her elderly years, and she'd shed her sullen and irritable attitude for a pleasant and joyous disposition. After spending 2 days at Mupatedzi village, Uncle Yananai complained of a backache, which he realized was sparked by sleeping on the hard floor. This was a wake-up call to him that he needed to build his parents a brand new and modern homestead. When he told them this news, they were delighted. Their joy was tripled when he promised to install solar energy to generate electrical power and to sink a borehole so that there would no longer be endless trips to the village borehole to fetch water. End of episode 4.